Today we are looking at the causes of hyperinflation in Weimar Germany during 1923. If you're not sure what hyperinflation was, you should go back and watch that video first, otherwise you might feel a little lost in this one. To understand the causes clearly, we'll organise them by time frame and see how they built upon each other over time. First, we'll start with the long-term causes, which was just the economic damage caused by the First World War. Second, we'll look at the impact of the Treaty of Versailles and those reparation payments. Third, we'll look at the short-term cause, which some might also consider to be the trigger event, which was the invasion of the Ruhr. And finally, we'll look at the trigger event, which was Germany's decision to print more money. The long-term cause of hyperinflation was rooted in Germany's experience of the First World War. During the war, the German government spent huge amounts of money on weapons, soldiers, supplies and the wider war effort. However, instead of raising taxes enough to pay for the war, the government relied heavily on borrowing money. The German government had assumed it would win the war and force the defeated countries to pay reparations to Germany. Instead, Germany lost. This meant the financial burden remained within the German state. Therefore, the First World War provided the backdrop to the later crisis of hyperinflation. It weakened Germany's economy and left the Weimar Republic with severe financial problems from the very moment it was created. A key conceptual term here is economic instability. Germany's economy was already fragile before the events of 1923. Hyperinflation didn't come from nowhere. It developed from the weaknesses that had already existed since the war. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forced to accept responsibility for the war through Article 231, often called the War Guilt Clause. More importantly for the economy, Germany had to pay reparations to the Allied powers. The reparations bill was set at £6.6 billion. This was a huge sum, and many Germans believed it was impossible to pay without damaging the economy. Reparations exacerbated Germany's financial problems. The Weimar government needed money not only to run the country, but also to meet these international payments. This placed enormous pressure on the state budget. The situation also damaged confidence. Foreign countries, businesses and ordinary Germans began to question whether the government could manage its debts. When people lose confidence in a currency, they are less willing to save or accept that money. This itself was a cause of normal inflationary increases. So, the Treaty of Versailles didn't directly cause hyperinflation by itself, but it intensified existing weaknesses. It added a new financial burden to a country already weakened by war debt. This is important. Historians often look at continuity and escalation. The crisis did not suddenly appear in 1923. It developed over time as earlier problems became more severe. The short-term cause of hyperinflation was the French and Belgian invasion of the Ruhr in January 1923. The Ruhr was a region within Germany. It was its most important industrial region. It produced coal, iron and steel, which were essential for the German economy because Germany was able to manufacture with and sell those raw materials. When Germany fell behind on reparation payments, France and Belgium sent troops into the Ruhr to seize goods and raw materials directly. This invasion worsened Germany's economic position because it disrupted the country's industrial heartland. The Ruhr was central to German production, exports and tax income. Once the region was occupied, Germany's ability to produce goods and generate income was badly weakened. The invasion of the Ruhr, therefore, deepened the crisis. It did not create Germany's economic problems from nothing, but it made them more severe by striking at the centre of German industry. In historical terms, the Ruhr invasion can be seen as a short-term cause because it escalated Germany's existing financial problems and it pushed the Weimar government into a more desperate situation. The trigger event was the German government's decision to print more money in response to the Ruhr crisis. After the invasion, the Weimar government ordered workers in the Ruhr to follow a policy of passive resistance. This meant workers refused to cooperate with the French and Belgian occupiers. They went on strike, refused to work in factories, and they disrupted production. Passive resistance was intended to show defiance, but it created a massive economic problem. If workers were not producing coal, iron and steel, Germany had fewer goods to sell and less wealth was being created. At the same time, the government promised to keep paying their striking workers. However, because it didn't have enough money, it printed more banknotes. The decision to print more money triggered hyperinflation. The key problem was that the government was increasing the supply of money while the supply of goods was falling. More money was chasing less wealth. As a result, prices rose rapidly and the value of the mark collapsed. So, while the invasion of the Ruhr exacerbated the crisis, the decision to print money transformed serious inflation into hyperinflation. So, to summarise, the long-term cause was the economic damage caused by the First World War. Germany had to borrow heavily during the war, which left the economy weakened. The medium-term cause was the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations burden. Reparations increased pressure on the German economy and undermined confidence in the mark. The short-term cause was the invasion of the Ruhr. This disrupted Germany's industrial heartland and reduced production. And finally, the trigger event was the Weimar government's decision to print more money to pay striking workers and cover its costs. This caused inflation to spiral into hyperinflation. A strong GCSE explanation should not say that one single factor caused hyperinflation. Instead, it should show how different factors interacted. The First World War provided the backdrop. Reparations exacerbated Germany's existing problems. The invasion of the Ruhr deepened the crisis. The decision to print more money triggered the collapse of the mark. That is the key to understanding why hyperinflation happened in Germany in 1923.